You're listening to Fictron, the alternative fiction portal. Today we'll be examining 17776, a surreal work of digital fiction featuring sentient space probes and weird football. Be sure to like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get alternative.
Once upon a time our teacher said, "You'll never break the rules that we define." But times are changing now, let's look ahead. It's time for us to read between the lines.
Hey, what's up guys? My name is BÉLA Ogier, and I got a ticket for the big game. It's sports.
I'm PDB, and let's get ready to rumble.
Da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da-da.
My name is Izzy Adzardi, and please respond. Please respond. Please answer.
So, 17776, a very strange work of digital fiction using mixed media and a bit of like a sci-fi, but also kind of a bit of a cerebral thought experiment with a large emphasis on American football.
Yes, absolutely. It's a very philosophical piece of interactive internet science fiction.
This story follows 3 satellites out in deep space in the distant year off in the future of 17776. And it turns out in this setting, right, that when satellites are left in space for long enough, absorbing broadcast signals from Earth for tens of thousands of years, they become sentient. So our 3 satellites are Pioneer 9, Pioneer 10, and JUICE, aka the Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, which are all real-life satellites, by the way.
I think JUICE is set to launch this year, right?
Yes.
Very excited.
Proud of him.
Very proud of him. I hope he finds some icy moons.
One thing that is, I think, most notable about this story is the fact that it is hosted on SB Nation, which is a respected sports journalism website, and it just happens to have on it this weird interactive work of like mixed media fiction written by Jon Bois, who is also a sports journalist himself. But that would be like if the Washington Post had an ARG in their columns, right? Because this is really just this weird one-off thing they did, and I think it's super cool.
Yeah, the Gene Weingarten cinematic universe. Yeah. You gotta click on all his little author portraits in order to unlock the secret. It's the same sort of thing.
And so it opens with this, what appears to be an article on SB Nation about how football has to change and how it's destined to change in the future, and then turns into what seems to be some kind of interference in the article itself, pleading for help, and then as you keep scrolling, the text gets really large until it fills the background black, and then you're redirected to this long page of calendars starting at March 43, and you see our first 2 characters, each indicated by a different text color, starting to talk to each other. And so one of the characters reaches out to the other, saying, "9, can you hear me? If you can, please be patient. I promise that I will answer you. I understand that you might be afraid." And 9 just absolutely loses it because, so more than a year passes and they are just basically calling out into the void, asking for this person, the only person they've ever spoken to, or who has spoken to them rather, to answer. And they're just desperately wanting some feedback, some communication in return. And it's a beautifully raw depiction of a machine suddenly becoming sentient and just being lost and scared and in the dark.
And wanting that, like, sort of contact that is given to them by somebody else.
Absolutely, and it really strikes me as a great use of the translation of time into the translation of space. Because we're scrolling through the calendars, but because it takes us time to get through them, we get the sense of the passage of time.
Plus the sheer amount of time that you can see, like, visually passing in front of you as you're scrolling. Like,
yes.
It starts in, like, some year 43, and then you keep going, and I'm still scrolling as we are speaking about this.
So the years at first we're only shown the last digits of the years, so we have no idea how far distant into the future it is at this point.
Scott McCloud talked about this in one of his Creating Comics books, where you can use the size of a comic panel to indicate that more time is occurring within that panel. And this is exactly the same thing. This is what that is.
Yeah, and especially when you see most of the pages of this calendar are just empty. There's no dialogue whatsoever, and you really see how much this character 9 starts to lose hope and just stops even sending messages out until the green text, who we find out to be Pioneer 10, finally responds and says, "It takes me a long time to respond to you, and you need to save your power." It really feels like there's something at stake. It's like Pioneer 10 says, 9, I know this is difficult. Listen to me carefully, and I will get you out of this. It will take a great deal of patience, but one day it will be over. I need you to rotate your magnetometer exactly 113 degrees. And you just get this sense that there's something important at stake.
Yeah, and like you get a sense that like this communication is like needed, especially like with this newly sentient satellite. This is all they know now. And you as like a creature, you know you don't want to be alone after that. You can empathize.
Yeah. And so then when they finally succeed in following Pioneer 10's instructions, they are suddenly able to, it's not really explained how, but they unlock this ability to communicate through quantum mechanics. And so they're able to communicate instantaneously all of a sudden. So imagine that after being in such isolation, only hearing one message every however many, like 300 something days it is, and then suddenly you are able to communicate with this other character in real time. Like how jarring that would be.
It really does snowball from that point on, too.
It's very much a revelatory plot. We only find things out by pulling threads.
Right. And so the story starts, and it's like, wow, this is so much time is passing with nothing happening. Like, what a crazy, huge scale this is for this to take place under.
And a lot of the text is also, like, visual as opposed to, like, the format that it comes in from that point on, too. It's shown, like, alongside and within the actual calendar years versus the just chat format that is added in almost immediately after. So you can really tell that it is, like, happening so fast that you don't need to do the calendar bits anymore.
Yeah, the whole thing is like the curtain slowly rising.
Yeah, exactly. And then
right.
It shoots off.
It is, yeah, the curtain's slowly rising, and then once it rises, you realize very quickly that, like, for as dire as it seemed for 9 to listen to 10 and to do all these things over the course of so many years, we very quickly learned after this opening segment that really what they were doing was not dire in any way whatsoever, and what we also learn is that this time scale that we are presented with on this calendar is nothing to the actual time scale, that is implied to have gone by in the rest of the story. Like I said before, right, the calendars are only shown with the last 2 digits of the year, so we sort of imagine it to be, 19 whatever, or maybe 20 whatever.
Yeah.
But you would never imagine it to be 17-7 whatever,
Yeah, it's over 15,000 years in the future.
But so, in this weird future that we're introduced to over the next series of pages, we learn that, hey, humans, for whatever reason, in the year 2026, miraculously just stopped dying of natural causes and stopped also giving birth. They became infertile. You have no more people being born and no more people, for the most part, dying since the year 2026. So this distant future is filled with the same humans that existed over 15,000 years ago. And then we learn, right, that humans could still die of unnatural causes, like hurting themselves or being killed or whatever. But they've invented this nanobotic technology now that keeps them safe and keeps them from dying. So you have a whole planet filled with humans from roughly circa 2020s who are effectively immortal.
And all around the same age, too. You can basically be whatever age you want.
It's interesting because there's said to be like all these technological advancements like the nanobots and like, age reconstruction surgery that's just absolutely revolutionary. And not to mention like all of the original architecture and buildings are still intact, which is crazy. So there's like advents in architectural technology as well. But for as much as that stuff has changed, everything else has remained eerily similar to how it was in the 2020s.
Yeah, the whole world in stasis.
Pretty much.
At one point, they raised the question of whether it's purgatory, and looking at it from the outside, I'm inclined to agree.
It is a very purgatorial setting, right? It's like a big sort of theme of this story is exploring this idea of the conflict that comes with having no conflict, because people can't die, there's no more war, of course, either, because they're in a post-scarce economy where like they can pretty much have whatever they want whenever they want at this point.
There's no need for any resource stealing because you have all the resources already. Everybody is already able to sustain themselves. Like, they're built to stay alive now, and so stay alive they will.
Yeah.
And the nanobots, like, create food for them and stuff.
The nanobots slowly shoving a granola bar into your open mouth.
Yeah, like, really, there couldn't be any conflict even if they wanted to. It would predictably be shut down almost immediately.
They even have an infinite amount of the most important resource, time. They have nothing but time on their hands. Now that's no longer a limited resource. Why do anything?
And so it's sort of this world in which they live, in which there is no more real conflict anymore, that sort of becomes the conflict in and of itself. Like, a lot of the story is sort of this, Nine, the newly awoken satellite, reacting in horror to this new reality in which he has found himself in, and the other robots sort of trying to console him and reassure him.
Yep, one day the world's server settings got set to creative, and no one knows why.
That's exactly it. It's like if the world suddenly got sent to creative in real life.
A good portion of it is Nine attempting to rationalize purpose in life.
Absolutely.
And especially as I believe he was launched in either the 60s or 1960s or 70s or 80s, I think, as I'm scrolling through. But an era in time where it was very much you have to, like, work to earn your life. And there's a lot of themes, especially in the beginning, where he is confused about, like, what is driving humans to continue living on besides the fact that they'd have to. And what their life is worth now that, like, they really don't have to work.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where the theme of football comes into play. Because, it's implied that this has happened all over the world, right? But they are specifically focused on the United States, and specifically they're focused on watching people play football, which football itself has transformed drastically in these 15,000 years. 10 has a quote saying that, humans they're creatures of play now.
Yep.
Like, this is their final resting state. Like, they're at the very end of their life cycle, and their final resting state is this permanent state of play. So I think the theme of football works very well with this story for the themes it has, because that's what people do when they have nothing to do or worry about. They play.
Exactly, and they work their innovative tendencies, now that they've finished science, into contriving these sort of, like, overly complicated games and new ways to continue playing football.
Right.
Yep, defining new game modes.
Yeah, exactly.
Just any way to find new purpose in life, anything to just give them a sense of purpose and accomplishment, even if they have to make it themselves.
Yeah, spleef the size of a continent, why not?
Izzy, when you said that they've achieved all this science and technology, that's what's so interesting about how much of the world has otherwise stayed the same, in spite of, like, apart from the nanobots and I guess the sustainable architectural technology, however that works. Everything else has stayed the same, and, like, the satellites go into how actually humans did invent flying cars, and they did try to, travel into space and find other life. They did every single, like, scientific utopian endeavor they could think of, and they found, there's a really good quote about this I'm looking for. People defeated scarcity. Everyone had what they needed and nobody got sick, but they found that they needed things to be just a little bit difficult once in a while. They needed to stub their toe and wait in line to see that check engine light. They decided to leave their existence just a little short of perfect because they wanted to want.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And, I can't help but feel that the story would have been more interesting if it were set during that period where people were trying to do all those crazy sci-fi ideas. But this story, as it is, explores significantly different ideas. It's much more of an idea story than an event story. So yes. I think that setting it this far into the future, past the point where people have gotten completely tired of all the flying car and jetpack type of stuff, it lends itself very well to a much more philosophical story and an examination of what happens to the human spirit when it's got nothing left to do.
Absolutely.
They say something here when they're talking with the Hubble telescope. They say something about how apparently the top speed you can travel is 500,000 miles an hour. And even though that's not the speed of light, significantly lower than the speed of light, but it's the maximum speed that humanity could ever achieve. And this is in the middle of a really interesting section where you have to scroll in a zigzag pattern to read it. And they actually comment on how poorly formatted it is.
It was a little bit tedious reading it on mobile as well.
That is fair. This interesting section about, like, well, they have to keep trying. They have to explore. It's part of the human spirit. And then it's like, but why?
Right. 9 is so still stuck in, the 20th or 21st century, and this whole idea of, like, we have to try, but...
Yeah, the 20th century Satillionaire grind set.
Yeah.
Yeah. As our three main characters, the satellites, have developed sentience, they've also each developed their own personalities. Our main protagonist, Pioneer 9, who is sentient for the first time and basically still getting himself figured out and...
Launched in 1968.
Just born.
Only just now becoming sentient, yes.
Yeah.
And he's very he goes from being very lost and scared, of course, in the opening.
A young satellite stands alone in his orbit.
Shut up.
Though he is already 15,000 years old, it is only
Shut
today he will be receiving a name.
I'm trying to introduce the characters. So Pioneer 9, of course, is very lost and afraid at first, and then that fear becomes, as he starts to learn about how this twisted world works and what it has become, he becomes horrified in a different sense, and then eventually he sort of settles into this kind of sort of existential pessimism once he finally starts to accept the reality of the world, but then kind of gradually warms up to his friends, the satellites, supporting him, and I think by the end he starts to become a little more...
He accepts the horrors.
A little bit more optimistic.
You can project yourself onto him so well, especially because he has sort of the most 21st century to 20th century ideals. Like I said before, it's a mindset that you've seen and is recognizable to every reader.
Yeah, he's the audience insert because he's from the 20th century.
Yes, exactly.
He's the most old-fashioned character, definitely.
Yeah, the way Fry is in Futurama.
Yeah,
because he's the man from yesterday.
Yeah, it is a bit like Fry from Futurama, actually. That's a great parallel.
Because instead of going through all that time intervening, he just jumped ahead.
What if we gave robots depression and an identity
Yeah, what if we
crisis?
gave robots depression? And so Pioneer 10, who refers to herself as Pioneer 9's little sister, right?
Yep.
Is sort of the most level-headed out of all of them, and has sort of more of a seriousness to her, and
a more mature sort of vibe.
Yeah, she wants to take care of Pioneer 9 and comfort him when he first comes to life.
And she's the one that first got in contact with him in the first place.
And she's trying to reassure him about hey, it'll be okay, I know it's scary to you now, but just trust me, you'll be just fine. And then you have Juice, who is just the absolute meme king over here.
Our very, very special comedy relief character.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a lot he reminds me a lot of Dave Strider from Homestuck.
Yeah, there's a definite flippant sardonicism to his tone of voice. He talks like he's always kind of sarcastic and always just wants to make fun.
It's interesting though, because there's definitely a few moments where you can tell that he's being sincere, and you can tell that he actually does care about the characters. I think, as far as for as much of an overabundance as this character type as there is nowadays, I feel like his specifically is written pretty well.
Yeah, he's got a little more depth to him than the superficial flippant character. Oh no, we try not to be taken too seriously around here, huh? I'm gonna make fun of you even while I'm your friend, There's some characters written these days that are nothing but that, and Juice does have a little more depth to him, and I think that the Dave Strider comparison is a fair one, because Dave also displays some depth.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's done in a less it's a more compacted time frame than Homestuck was. Because it took a little while for Dave to get a lot of development.
Yeah, ironically, because this is so far in the future as well.
I know, exactly.
Exactly. It's interesting for as huge as this timescale is, for as far in the future as it is, we really only basically, the bulk of the story really takes place over a day, pretty much?
Yeah, pretty much
so.
A day, and then it's even the length of the comic itself is not it's a pretty reasonable read.
Yeah, so I think Juice's flippancy is kind of warranted, because it's I guess that would be a type of character who would arise in response to such eternal boredom. Yeah, why not? Why not talk like the kind of kid who brings an Invader Zim backpack to school?
Yeah.
Oh, they told me I read at a college level, and look at me now. I don't read anymore. I'm just on social media.
You know, when you bring that up, I think there's a parallel to be drawn between sort of the satellite style of communication with each other. I think there's a parallel to be drawn with that and sort of contemporary 21st century loneliness with like how more and more interaction is done online and not in person. That's what it really reminds me of. Like they talk to each other like friends talk to each other online.
Absolutely.
You know,
it feels like the Pester logs, but it also feels like
Yeah.
just general, this is how people talk to each other through Discord or chats.
Yeah, like because they're like physically, they're like billions of light years away from each other at this point.
Yeah.
And so like they cannot physically see each other like whatsoever, and it's like even if they could, like they're still just satellites. Like really, they wouldn't be able to like, you know, like hug each other or anything like that.
Collide as fast as you can.
And so, and it's the same with like the humans on Earth. They're able to talk to the humans on Earth via like calling them on their phones and such, right?
Yeah.
Which is strange, but
it's an interstellar ballistic glomp.
Please.
Oh man.
Relativistic kinetic bombardment glomp.
Real.
Jesus. Oh my god.
That would be like the one way a character could possibly die in this story, is it for it to be like one of the satellites who then gets just like absolutely destroyed by like space glomping, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
That's so funny.
It does remind me a lot of like sort of how people talk online.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's probably part of the reason why it got a lot of comparison with Homestuck. Like,
Oh yeah, for sure.
like not only in the like style, but like the emphasis on there being so much space between them and the like sort of loneliness of it. Definitely.
Yeah.
It
Exactly.
gives.
It is very lonely. It's kind of sad, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting to me that there's some stories that rely so heavily on remote communication this way, and some stories that would be completely destroyed by it. Because I was just thinking of Pet Sematary by Stephen King. That plot was written in the 20th century. It would be completely demolished if they had cell phones. Like, all you would need is like, hey, I'm stuck at the airport, I'll be home soon, love you. And
That's
then
like-
the
yeah.
story's over in 5 minutes.
That's
But
almost
Homestuck
all
in
horror,
1770s, 70s, yeah, exactly. Any horror story completely destroys itself if the characters have cell phones that work, keep in mind. But this kind of story is entirely founded upon remote communication. It couldn't exist without that artifice, without that necessary device. So it is really interesting to me that it then chooses to not just use it as the way the characters are talking to each other, but to underscore the setting itself and the distance between them.
Yeah.
Just as well, we have characters on the ground talking to each other, like the guy who runs into the bee cave guy, and it's just like a random chance coincidence. Yeah.
The story is presented through a series of text logs between the characters using different colors for each character speaking, simple GIFs showing like the playing fields for specific football games or what like the weather is like or stuff like that. And then like these satellite images. It makes very good use of like Google Earth satellite imagery, and I think that's very clever because these characters are satellites, so it's as if you're seeing the world through their lens, right?
And there's lots of...
I like that.
There's graphics overlaid as if it were the sports commentator thing where they can draw on the field.
Yes.
So there's like X's and
You're seeing
O's
it.
moving around as a play on the map, but the map is the entire size of Nebraska. Or they'll have
Right,
an overlay
exactly.
graphic of the playing field, the really long, thin one, running across miles and miles of hillside, and it just goes up and down, ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. And
It has this really interesting compression where like a lot of the graphics like seem to be kind of like posterized and aliased a bit,
Yeah.
but it gives it this interesting quality.
exactly.
Sort of
It-
JPEG artifacty.
It looks very empty, but it also looks like something out of an educational software.
Yes. And speaking of it feeling empty, I want to talk about real quick, like, I find it very unsettling that you don't actually see the human characters.
Yeah, I was just
You-
thinking about that too. Like you see portraits and photos of like centuries gone by. It's really interesting.
Yeah,
actually.
and there's
But
a lot
no
of
live humans.
news article clippings. Yeah, no
Yes.
live humans.
And it's so eerie because this whole world just seems so empty and desolate, but it's apparently still
thriving.
alive and well.
Yeah,
thriving. And I think that sort of only further emphasizes this kind of sense of loneliness the satellites must have, that immensely unsettling.
Yeah, the perspective of a satellite looking down on the world really lends itself well to a sort of dehumanized setting. I see this in a lot of indie games, tend to have a zoomed out camera, which lets you see a much larger area of the game world, but the character looks so tiny on the screen, it's almost like you're up above the clouds, like in SimCity. And you're looking down on the world, so you're very much physically isolated from it.
To get a bit into the football games themselves, like to give you guys an idea of like how crazy football has become, there's all these variations of it now, and many of them take place like across states or across the continent, with like entire states or entire border of two states as like the playing field, for example.
Yeah.
And people literally running across all this distance. And there's one game in particular that 9 reacts to with just obscene disgust, where it's like it's running, it's only like a few hundred yards wide, but the length of the playing field runs from like the top to the bottom of the continental United States. And in this playing field happened to be this like cliff face drop off into like a river valley. And so, the people playing this football game were confined to this very narrow space between two cliffs.
Yeah, Page, Arizona, that's the game.
Yes.
Which is presented in the form of a podcast about trash football.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Yes, we were introduced to this specific game by a podcast called Garbage Football.
Yeah, although our viewer characters are actually like the satellites, we get a lot of the story by way of basically vox populi, people on the ground talking to each other. And I guess the satellites are listening in. So it's a very strange format. It's really
it's interesting because the satellites are basically eavesdropping on all the human characters and they're like what they're broadcasting out, and we're seeing it
by way of their communications. And so you get the sort of like nested and interconnected story. It's told through a bunch of different point of view characters all at once.
Yes, it sort of goes back and forth between like specific characters down on Earth and then the satellites sort of commenting on what they're saying.
Yeah, the story's being hucked around like a football.
Yeah, it absolutely is. You're
pretty
right.
much.
Yeah, and the Page, Arizona game, it goes from the Canadian border to the Mexican border, and it's stymied at a cliff face in Page, Arizona, but it's 44,000 times longer than it is wide.
And so what happened, though, was that when someone got the ball like down into that cliff, which, you have to go down that cliff, it's part of the playing field. But what happened was that both teams just got stuck down there and neither team could get out, climbing up the like, however, it's like, a several 100-foot cliff face or something. And neither of them could climb back out. They were just always fumbling with the football and trying to get it from each other. But here's the thing. They've been playing this game in this cliff continuously for literally like 10,000 years or something insane like that.
Yeah, these games have like an insane runtime.
It's like just obscene runtime.
Yeah, 12,258 years long. That's how long this game has been running. What great garbage football.
Yeah, so like one of the first things Nine brings to attention after seeing this game, he says, we don't do anything, right? Like referring to him and the other two satellites. There's nothing we're supposed to be doing. And 10 says, nope, we completed our mission 15,000 years ago. And 9 responds with, so now we just hang out. We perpetually hang out. Just like all the people down there, we shoot the shit and watch football and waste time. Then 10 points out, your choice of words is interesting, wasting time. And then they go into how, the time is literally infinite for them. So while it sounds absolutely batshit insane for people like us, to play a football game for 13,000 years, it kind of does make sense that if you had infinite time, like there's something scary about that in and of itself of, getting bored because you've literally run out of things to do. And 10 says as much, saying, I think they're doing the best they can, honestly, with immortality.
The length of the games definitely correlates and makes sense with like just existing for like a really, really long time. Because if you think about it in the sense of like everything starts to move faster the older that you get because of like relativity.
The length of the games seems to be a function of how people experience time as they get older.
Yes, exactly. So I think it would make sense for it to just seem like a normal amount of playtime.
Oh.
That's an interesting point. Like, yeah,
I see
it's
what
like,
you mean.
Yeah,
Like, is there an upper limit on that? Because it's true. Like, the equivalent of like a month when I was 5 years old felt like what to me now feels like maybe 9 months. You know?
exactly.
And it's a little scary. It's kind of honestly terrifying. It's like, wow, death's gonna come that fast.
They don't have to worry about that.
Right. And so it does kind of beg the question, is there an upper limit on that? Like, will it just exponentially feel faster to them?
Yeah, because if you're 15,000 years old and you're playing a game that's 12,000 years old, I mean, that's most of your life has been spent on that, but you're aging as fast as the game is.
Yeah, and there are aspects of this that they do talk about, sort of the culture and the changes it goes through over time. But they talk about, like, the passage of thousands of years as if it were, like, a decade.
Yeah.
Especially, like...
Absolutely.
There's a point in the comic where, like, this one woman states, like, oh, I was wearing these, like, bell-bottom jeans. This is definitely from, like... like the 15,000s.
Like, so 15,700.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
like they
that.
and they can pinpoint it to a specific like decade, even like after all the time like jumbles together. It's very interesting.
So that's one example of a football game shown in this story. This game in particular, this Canyon game, I think particularly does really well to address the sort of existential themes of this story. But there's like literally hundreds of other game modes, and we get like a sneak peek into this world seeing these other crazy games. I think we should start with Game 27.
Not Game 27.
So I love Game 27 because Game 27 was one of the first games to take place after football started to change, and it started as like a typical traditional football game between two teams. I think, what was it, the Broncos and...
Denver Broncos and Pittsburgh Steelers.
I love this like intro video. For those who haven't looked at it yet, the mixed media we're talking about in 1770-76 is a lot of Google shapefiles modified and edited on top of Google Maps fly-throughs using Google Earth as a software.
Yeah.
So you end up with a lot of like really weird garbage piled on top of existing buildings. And so for Game 27, we zoom into the Denver, Colorado stadium, only to find a whole bunch of like Roblox-looking ass buildings in the middle of it.
Yeah, just random nonsense and all this bullshit. Because
so funny.
So Game 27 was going to be a regular football game, right? But then, due to all these weird bureaucratic loopholes, basically over the course of several thousands of years, it metamorphized into this monstrosity where just nothing happens anymore.
There's like a Denny's or something. It's a Bojangles.
Bojangles.
They opened a Bojangles like in dead center field. It's so good.
Yeah, Juice zooms in on the Bojangles. Like I guess so. All three of them sort of have this. Like, I guess they're able to see the Earth somehow
through Google Maps, somewhat.
So Juice zooms in on the Bojangles on this field, and Nine is like, "Whoa!" And Juice is like, "I know. I thought it was crazy too. Bojangles is primarily a southern chain. I never thought they would expand to Colorado."
Yeah.
I love Game 27. It reminds me, it's like the same kind of shit you would see in Homestuck, where you're given like sort of a very sort of basic kind of premise to go off of for like how the systems can evolve, and then you just cut back later to see some total nonsense has taken place, but you can kind of infer like what would have happened for it to be like that. It's like that.
Yeah, what evolution of the rules took place, or how people figured out exploits and combinations of the rules. It looks like a Minecraft server with like 20 12-year-olds on it.
It gives you just enough information to go off on to like infer what probably happened.
You can kind of see like certain things were added after other things. There's a sort of detective work you can do here. I like the little sublet lots in the middle, like 19 through 27.
Yeah, the little housing units.
Yes.
And there's like a statue of like Sir Walter Riley as well.
Yeah.
Like they just started like creating like anything.
So 10 is like, is that a statue of Sir Walter Raleigh? And Juice is like, yeah. Why? Is there any explanation you would possibly find satisfactory? No.
And he's also like surrounded and almost entirely by a wall.
Yeah.
Like they built the statue first, and then the wall had to go around him.
Yeah. He's in like literally like a little circular enclave.
Yeah, little alcove. Yeah.
There's the giant skyscrapers that they don't even address.
Yeah, they don't even talk about like the gigantic like.
It just becomes a little city.
When I talked about like, being able to infer stuff, I'm inclined to believe that was like one of the sub games that started on this field where like the end zones were at the top floor and bottom floor.
Oh, that would be so funny.
Vertical football.
You have to go up and down the elevator shafts.
Yeah, or like the stairways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh god, that would be crazy.
The top floor team would have a clear advantage.
Unless it swaps with every goal.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Or it could be, like who can throw the ball the highest.
Man.
I wonder if people have written their own like little fan football games.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Fantasy football.
I mean,
Future?
yeah, fantasy football. Football.
No, like but like fan games for like
For
this setting.
yeah, like
Yes.
I think that's really
I'm
clever.
absolutely sure.
There's an infinite amount of choice.
You could bring up Blazeball. Do you guys know about Blazeball?
I have heard
know
of
of
it.
it.
Yeah.
It's Wikipedia describes it as a baseball simulation horror game played via a web browser. But I've never gotten into it, but I have friends who are into it. It's just, what in the hell? And it's kind of the same thing. It's like BS nonsense rule sets with like made-up fictional horror absurdist games and teams. And, it's kind of the same thing it's getting at. It's like, what if we unlocked the rulebook?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Random events such as the incineration of players by rogue umpires.
People love fucked up sports. I love it.
Man.
I was surprised that Blazeball was actually a playable game and not just like people dicking around in a fan wiki. I thought for the longest time that it was just like a collaborative canon, but it's actually playable apparently.
Oh,
I didn't know
That's
that
awesome.
until right now.
Wow.
I was wondering if you guys would like to talk about any of the humans.
Okay.
I don't have a
like-
particular one in mind for starting for, but
I think we should start with Nancy McGunnell. I think she's sort of the main human, if I had to pick one. Of all the humans they interact with or observe on Earth, I think Nancy McGunnell is the most sort of prominent one in the story, and she's the first one that we're introduced to in the story, in fact.
And she's brought up more than once, which is something that could be
Yes.
said for all the rest of the humans in this.
Right. Yeah, because so imagine this, right? Picture this. You are a inanimate object who suddenly becomes sentient out of nowhere, and then you wait for literally almost half a century to finally have instant communication with the only person you've ever spoken to for 50 years or whatever. And then you finally can talk to them instantly. And you're like, what's going on? What the hell? And they just say, hey, you want to watch some football?
Yeah, the game is on.
So that's the first thing Juice and 10 show 9, or once he can communicate with them, they tune into the first football game we see, which is
Yeah, it's Nebraska. The playfield is Nebraska.
And the end zones are Wyoming and Iowa. And so Nancy McGunnell is a player, I think she was playing for Wyoming and trying to get, to Iowa. And there just happened to be a tornado coming in where she was, and so she actually ran into the tornado, and we don't see any of this happen, it's just sort of inferred, but she runs into the tornado.
Described, I think, via podcast, isn't it?
Yes.
And
there's
GIFs. There's storm chasers
filming
from the
that's
ground.
True.
There's the zoom in GIF where the tornado warning symbol appears on the playfield, which is one of the best. Yeah, it's like between Staplehurst and Garland and Seward here. It's some tornado passing through, and we see her playfield line kind of zooms out and magnifies, and we see it on the scale of entire towns. It's so funny.
Right, and so she runs into this tornado to basically try to throw the people trying to tackle her off her stride.
Yeah.
And it sweeps her up and takes her nearby a little town called B, Nebraska.
And it's also, I think, like the first time we see someone like actually death defy in the story. Like just do something completely outside of human nature, like
So
that would
out of left field.
that
yeah.
would like
So to
ordinarily like
speak.
get you killed. But like now we
Yeah.
see like how they're using it to their advantages.
Yeah, let alone that she's running at 20 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this story really perpetually, like, throws this crazy shit at you with no explanation whatsoever, and only then do we learn, like, what is actually going on after each crazy feat takes place.
Yep.
So she lands in near B, Nebraska, where she ends up hiding out so that she can't be tackled. And we learn about this interesting building called the B States Ballroom, which is a real building in B, Nebraska that was built out of leftover sidewalk parts during the Great Depression after they had finished up the sidewalk project that company was commissioned to build. And, I mean, it's just like a cool little piece of, like, you know, fun fact history. I really like it when stories include, like, these little like tidbits of local flavor like that. Like I think it's awesome to immortalize like very small local landmarks like that in fiction.
Especially when it's like something that seems a little bit more mundane. Like it wouldn't be like a super like touristy capital or anything, but it like becomes special now that it is this
Exactly.
in this future. It's something else that like that like humans really enjoy to do is just like make things special when they may not be inherently, I guess, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What, human exceptionalism?
We want stuff that we can treasure
Yeah.
and like be proud of.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nancy McGunnell has a really good quote here I'm trying to find. Yeah, so towards the end of the story, Pioneer 9 actually contacts Nancy on the phone and tries talking to a human for the first time, right?
Oh yeah, because
And-
10 is like, here, I will let you talk to one of these people, and then like is like, here,
Yeah.
have your little play date, bye, and then dips
Yeah.
in the conversation.
She was apparently like almost died before this amazing miracle took place where people stopped dying, right? Like
Yeah.
she was an elderly woman who was like about to settle down. She was going to be one of those people who died.
Yeah, I think she
And
had
then-
cancer, is what she
Yeah.
mentioned.
And then just before it like finally took hold of her, basically, she miraculously was cured, and they were like, "Oh, it's happening to you too." What is? Nothing.
Yeah, just the
Right.
the secretiveness of the
Well, yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
And so she has this amazing quote, though, during this whole conversation with Nine, where they talk about like how football has changed. And Nine says, "This is so far from my idea of football." And Nancy responds with, "Football's different things to different people. I see this kind of football, the open world kind, as its end state. The old grid football, the 100-yard kind, was basically just training wheels. The game was always all about the field, of course, the ground, the earth. And it was kind of like, here, take this little boring flat grassy rectangle and prove you can really know it and understand it."
Yeah.
And they spent hundreds of years getting to know the hell out of it. And now, to me, football is a further exercise in getting to know and love this world, this planet. You know, the actual ground. It's so rich with history, it's just embarrassing.
Absolutely. It's a really powerful quote.
I think that plays really well into like this just a sort of innate simplistic beauty of the B States Ballroom for what it is and for its history. Like just appreciating the little things and just noticing as much beauty in the world as you can.
Yeah. This definitely has the same sort of appeal to obscurantism that something like Antiques Roadshow has.
Oh yeah.
Looking at the little hidden treasures rather than just the big things that everyone focuses on and worries about.
You know, and it's like in spite of how sort of terrifying this world is and like just the sort of dauntingness of you're never going to die, you're going to live forever now, as daunting as that is, I think that is sort of the one like really, you know, major, I think, positive effect it has had on this world is that people do now do that.
That they appreciate the small things.
Yes, like Eddie Kruger. Let's talk about Eddie Kruger, our cave boy.
Yes.
Yes.
Eddie Kruger is a character who's
Also, I think his name is Ed Krieger, not Kruger.
Ed Krieg. Okay, yeah. Yeah, Ed Krieger.
Not Freddy Krueger.
So he has the football, right, for his team, for this one football game, and he's hiding out in this cave.
And
this
has
cave called
been
11
for
Jones
like
Cave.
almost 10,000 years.
Yes, and basically, as so long as no one finds him within a certain duration of time, his team wins by default. So and he doesn't want anyone to find him. And as the satellites come and zoom into the cave to check on how he's doing, just so happens that this like religious Christian missionary guy
Tim
stumbles upon him.
Tim, we love Tim. He's hilarious.
We stand Tim. He's so earnest.
He's part of this project, like completely void of any football relation, called No Rock Unturned.
That's exactly the kind of thing that would arise. Like it's perfectly verisimile. It's perfectly realistic.
Absolutely, especially for like something that is like American Christian organization. It seems like something they would do, which is just like given the circumstances. So they assign like all the participants like a line of latitude to walk along, and you have to like see everything there. So his like went through 38, 13, 18 line of latitude, and stumbled across the cave, and he's this very chipper young man with terrible anxiety.
Yes.
That is trying really hard to make a connection with like disgruntled football player who double dribble. He wants to play double dribble and be left alone in his little cave.
In order to pass the time while he's in this cave, Ed Krieger has taken to playing this stupid, like, little Tiger electronic game called Double Dribble. And what happened was that, he he got really good at it, and so then he started trying to figure out how to beat it in, like, at very specific time intervals, and it just became more and more meticulous of, like, the way that he was specifically trying to beat it with. He explains to Tim how we have literally an eternity. It's like he says like you want to ration the mystery. You don't want to know everything right away. And it's like he says like Tim like what, like he's like, you're an asshole. You're trying to know too much too fast. And it's like you're gonna run out and then you're gonna be desperate for more mystery. And so I think just when it comes to what we were talking about with appreciating the little things, I think this guy, Ed Krieger, has really mastered that, because he's just absolutely savoring literally every minute scrutinous detail he can possibly get out of this Tiger electronic game, this one game.
Handheld Konami game. Yeah, it's like one of those little plastic things that you'd get in like a McDonald's Happy Meal.
Yeah.
The screen barely lights up. There's no visuals.
Yeah.
You guys want to talk about Game 500?
Oh yeah, 500.
I'd love to talk about Game 500.
500 is interesting, because I think we could actually play that in real life. Of all of these, I think it's the most realistic. You could absolutely build a cannon that does that. It would be stupid powerful, but I think you could do it.
You could build a real cannon that like shoots a ball like literally like thousands of miles.
From Denali or Mount McKinley all the way to Florida? I mean, maybe.
So for those not following...
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Izzy.
500 is a very extreme version of the classic children's game 500, where like you throw a ball in the air and you try and guess like where it's going to land, and then whoever catches it gets however many points was initially called. So it's basically that, but just it's cannons now. It's very science-y and
It's a giant cannon positioned in Denali, Alaska, that shoots footballs throughout the continental United States.
Aren't there more than one? I think there are like multiple throughout the continent that go off, but
I thought there was just the one cannon.
I could be wrong.
They call it the Denali cannon, which implies
implies other locations of it. Yeah.
Oh wait, that's a good point. And so someone gets to fire this cannon, and they fire footballs like wherever they want in the continental United States. And then whoever obtains this ball, if they choose to play, gets like a set amount of points determined by the person launching it. And if someone acquires enough points, then they get to be the one to launch the footballs from the cannon.
Yep.
Yes, and the special thing with the Denali cannon launch is not only that like we get to see it live in story basically, because it's occurring like in present time as events unfold, but it leads to the destruction of a very important piece of humanity's history, the Livermore light bulb.
Which it definitely strikes me that Jon Bois probably saw this on Vsauce or Atlas Obscura and thought, hey, that's cool. I kind of struggle to think that real people would care this much about a light bulb, or that many people would know about it, but after 15,000 years, I guess they would.
Yeah. And it's something dying in a world where things
Yeah.
can't die.
That's also true, actually, yeah.
So what we see is, that there's this light bulb, this real light bulb at the Livermore Fire Station in California. And it's like, it was one of the earliest light bulbs, I think, made that still exists today. And
And it's still
has only been
functional.
turned off. It's still functional to this day, and it's only been turned off a few times. And indeed, in 17776, it has stayed burning since, whenever the last time it was turned on.
It started burning in 1901. And I think that's also an extremely important fact of it, too, because nobody living at this point in 17776, nobody was alive when it started burning. So this is the oldest living thing.
Yeah,
Because
you're right.
everybody would have been from, the 40s on, I think, approximately.
Yeah, you'd have to be 125 years old when the immortality kicked in
Yeah.
to be alive before the Livermore bulb.
And so that football that 9, 10, and Juice were watching being launched from the Denali cannon at this moment happened to land right on this light bulb and shatter it, destroy it. And
Yeah.
it's... The video that shows it is genuinely really haunting because you see just sort of a satellite view of the cannon and it just goes up and it starts arcing over the continents of the United States in the direction. And as this is happening, there's text overlay of Juice and 10 freaking out when they realize where it's heading, and it has this ominous music playing.
Yeah.
That
The inevitable.
something bad's gonna happen.
You can feel the
it's
dread.
Yeah,
For sure.
the inevitable
Yeah.
that's happening. No one can prevent it, unfortunately.
it's such an unsettling moment in a story where there's otherwise no significant conflict.
Yeah, and all of that is between the point where they introduce the cannon and the point where they see the shatter. They have this really poignant discussion about how the only people there are a whole lot of areas in the United States, even now after 15,000 years, where no one has ever walked, and the only people who would be children, and there are no children anymore. I thought that was really poignant.
That was kind of strange too, though, because you have the people like Tim who literally are trying to uncover every spot of the United States. So wouldn't they have uncovered it by now? Or
Apparently not
eventually?
yet. They only have a few
Yeah.
hundred volunteers, and each of their ranges is only 100 feet wide.
That's true, yeah. But so it was weird that they were insisting that people wouldn't go there just to go there, because it seems to me to contradict what happened earlier.
Well, he's not doing it just to do it. He's doing it to meet people. But it's some of these places are behind office park buildings. It's how are you going to walk there in a latitude?
Yeah, and places you also really wouldn't think to go regardless either.
Yeah, the middle of the Dakota Badlands.
I feel like I would be the kind of person to do something like that if I were in this setting. I just I love just going to weird places that no one else thinks to go.
Well, I think that's fair.
See, that's a good point, because this story being written by a sports commentator definitely has a sports-based focus. There's no denying that,
Yeah.
and because that's the point. So if it were written by a geocacher, it would be completely different.
Yeah. And so it definitely is a poignant part of the story when they bring up oh yeah, there's no children anymore because everyone's grown up now. But I don't necessarily agree that no one would just go there either.
Yeah. But even so, it was a poignant point.
Yeah, and so with the Livermore light bulb though, not only is it older than anyone alive today, it's also the robots, the satellites kind of see it as their ancestor, right? Since it's the oldest piece of technology in existence up to that point.
Still
right?
alive, yeah.
Yeah. And so, they basically have a eulogy for it, and it's genuinely a pretty moving, sad moment, because it's this is a setting where no one has had cause to grieve for so long that no one really knows how to grieve anymore.
I love how it's presented, because we're tracking even though we can't see the ball at this scale, we're seeing its flight path in the tracking.
Yes.
It's so fascinating. It's a really novel method of presentation.
For a story with no sort of quote actual conflict, it really has a lot of somber moments.
Yeah.
I found the scene really moving I think Nancy's probably my favorite of all the humans we see. I really love, again, during the phone call she has with 9, she talks about when her grandfather passed away. He always rooted for the Cleveland Browns, and they're apparently a notoriously bad football team, but he had this neon sign saying "Go Browns" with their helmet logo on it in their house. And here she says, the night he passed away, I was staying the night. My grandma woke me up in the middle of the night and said a neighbor was coming by to watch me, that Grandpa had passed on. They'd already taken him away, and in the middle of everybody running around, there were a few minutes there where I was just there by myself in the family room, and the sign was the only thing on, and it just softly lit up the room in this beautiful sort of orangey brown. I was 8 years old then, and I remember just kind of standing there and looking at the light and the room, and you know what I thought? I remember thinking how strange it was that the light was still on. I thought that, well, if he was gone, then the light he switched on should have turned off. That as soon as he went, everyone should go with him. But there it was, just glowing.
And you scroll down and there's this really, like, sort of almost fragile, I'd say it's got this sort of fragility to it, this faint image of the sign glowing in the dark, the helmet outlined with a neon squiggle, and there's a visual poetry there.
Yeah. And she also sort of goes into how I'd flip around all the channels on the satellite box and all the shows were about people winning, people succeeding, people getting happy endings. And even in sports, even if a team was having a bad year, it was just kind of their turn to be bad. And in a few years, they'd be good again. And I'm sitting on my sofa thinking, a lot of good that does me. I don't know anything about that kind of life. I don't need all these stories when I'm sitting in this dusty little house with an oxygen tank. Just don't need it. And this is like back when she was, about to die. But the Browns, I knew they'd always be there. They'd always lose. I got up every morning. It hurt. And at night, I'd go to bed. They'd get up every Sunday, get the tar beat out of them, and they'd show up the next Sunday to do it all again.
Yeah.
And I loved that. I loved them. I felt like I was one of them. There's a lot of, you can definitely tell that Jon Bois is, a true appreciator of the sport of football. There's some very poignant sport spirituality in this story.
That's a good way to put it.
Where, like what sports really mean to people who care about them, who earnestly want to see their team do well or earnestly want to do well themselves in the sport. It's fascinating, though, because it's like I'm someone who really does not pay attention to or care much for sports at all. But I think Jon Bois does a really good job at sort of showing a window into what that is like for people who do
why.
Appreciate sports.
Absolutely.
The rationale behind it. I don't think any of the three of us are particularly sports-minded people.
The most I get into any kind of sport would be speedrunning, I guess.
Well,
I watch a lot of speedruns, but
not at all.
I have I want to get into parkour someday, but other than that, not really.
The two most nerdy possible sports that you could have possibly chosen.
All right. Well, thank you, Peter and Izzy, so much for joining me to talk about 17776. I realize this has been kind of an all-over-the-place episode, but it's kind of an all-over-the-place story.
This is a poem I wrote. I thought you guys might like to hear it because it's kind of relevant.
Sure.
When the world grows old and the sun grows dim, she'll be standing there only thinking of him on the ancient pier by the dried-up sea, wrecks of boats around from antiquity. That basin is quiet, perpetually filled with a low sterile mist, and 101 things that shouldn't exist are out there watching her as she watches them. As the mountains erode into flattery, his toothsome smile once a joy to see beats in her head like another pulse, and naught but a muscle is made to convulse as she oversees the eastern sky where the setting sun forever lies. But a billion years have come and gone, and the memory is only that. His face is a crease in a photograph, locked in a folded protein. Long past is the springtime of the Earth's second youth, long past are those bright days when tick and flu were extincted, and long past are those nights that existed. She is the queen of this cooling world, the soldier and the subject, the serf and the pauper, the slave. She is the undying, the enduring, the persister, and she loved a man who could not follow her, a man she could not follow, and guarded he sleeps in the rocks in her shade. Where will you be, he once had said, when the world grows old?
That was lovely.
Thank you.
Very poignant. And as one final note, we do have of cheese oracle wisdom for today.
Ooh. Oh, yes.
Sickness can't last, and comfort eulogy satellite.
Makes sense.
Makes quite a bit of sense, considering the notes were about this.
It's true. Sickness can't last because you'll either die or it'll get better. And if you do die, there will be a horde of satellites to comfort your spirit.
Or at least mourn you, at least.
Yep. Shoot for the moon, because even if you miss, your blood will boil in the vacuum of space.
The satellites will catch you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fictron. Be sure to like and subscribe to the Fictron YouTube channel. Also, check out the official Fictron website at altficportal.wixsite.com/Fictron. That's altficportal.wixsite.com/Fictron. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at altficportal. You can reach me on Twitter at serrated_M, Izzy at Tombstone, and PDB at peterdanielberg.com. Links and relevant media will be in the description. I'd also like to say this is a really special episode to me because I first read 17776 for a college course in digital fiction, and I can say with absolute certainty that if it weren't for that class, this podcast would not exist. So thank you very much, Professor K, and thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.